We have a geopolitical or a geo-economic event literally every single day.
What really went down? How did Muhammad Yunus get planted there?
What happened in Bangladesh was nothing but a regime change operation. Sheikh Hasina was someone who led a guided democracy.
How does one go ahead and hijack a train?
The Baluch fighters were very careful in letting go of the women and the children and the civilians, and they held only the soldiers hostage. Rawalpindi is what actually controls Pakistan. It's not Islamabad, it's certainly not Karachi. 26/11 was nothing but that original plan which we were preparing for and we were anticipating in 71. For Xi Jinping, he wants Taiwan. That's going to be his legacy. The future that we were promised seems a lot like the past.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Let's Chat with GB. Today is going to be an episode that is really going to matter. In a world that is changing like never before, geopolitics is something that is on top of everyone's mind. And if it's not, it should be. And with me today, I have an expert in the domain, Sandeep Unnithan, a journalist who is so passionate about defense and all things geopolitics. Someone's written 2 brilliant books on topics that we're going to talk about today as well. An editor at News 9 and someone who is a walking encyclopedia on all things defense. Sandeep, it is a pleasure to have you on Let's Chat with GB.
Thank you, Gaurav. Pleasure to be here.
You're most welcome, and it's great to have you here. How did this passion for defense journalism, really start for you? Because it's so niche. And there is no one, better in the domain. So I'm just wondering, where did this really start for you?
Well, it began because my father was in the forces. He was the Navy. He was a naval officer, and he got all those books from the command reference library. And that's what actually stoked my interest in military. So a lot of my early reading was on the world wars and, current affairs and military technology and all that. So that was what kind of, I was going to school and college, but I had this parallel course that was going on where my dad was bringing me up on this very rich diet of military literature. So that's how it kind of started off.
And I guess no points for guessing that history was probably your favorite subject and probably still is.
Oh, absolutely. I graduated with ancient Indian history. That is my core area. And I've been a lifelong student of history. I still am.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was fascinating. In fact, I think history was, definitely one of my favorite subjects, growing up as well. Eventually moved more towards, economics and money and all of that. But yeah, history definitely. And you, did mention this, that it was almost like history is repeating itself. We're talking about the age of empires. Thoughts on that? Like, what's really going on in the world we live in today?
It's very interesting, Gaurav, that you asked this. The fact is that, who was it who said that? Lenin said that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks in which decades happen. And we're living in exactly an age like that. Like we have a geopolitical or a geo-economic event literally every single day. It's either it's in Syria or it's in Israel or Russia. Ukraine has been on for 3 years. It's entered its 4th year. Who would have imagined in 2025 that we would be seeing Europe's longest war since the Second World War? If someone asked me about 25 years back, where would we be in 2025? I would think that we would be wearing space suits and driving around in flying cars and sipping food out of a cola container of liquid food. And all of that future that we were promised.
Correct.
But the future that we were promised seems a lot like the past.
So true.
And you're looking at a time when you have 5 members of the UN Security Council, the 5 permanent members.
Correct.
3 of them do not respect Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, which is to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of your neighbors.
100%.
The United States, Russia, and China. So this is the kind of age that we're living in. And I think we're returning to the age of empires that we were pre the First World War, where it's all about countries and its empires and countries disguised as empires, coveting territory. And Xi Jinping says, I want Taiwan, I want Arunachal Pradesh, I want everything under the sun, Trump issuing calls to Canada to join the Anglosphere. And these are sentiments, interesting, Gaurav, that existed in the turn of the previous century, in the late 19th century, when Britain and its colonies, the Anglosphere saw the rise of the United States.
Correct.
They saw the United States as becoming what Great Britain was in the 19th century. They saw the 20th century as being an American century. And they said that it's only a matter of time where America kind of amalgamates all these other countries, absorbs them, and leads the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
So the Five Eyes that we all talk about today is nothing but the Anglosphere.
Sure.
It's Great Britain and her colonies.
Agreed.
It just so happened that one of those colonies turned out to be far bigger than any other country in the world, and that's the United States of America for you, which is now, increasingly dictating everything that goes on today, whether it's geopolitics, economics, and we're right in the middle of a tariff war.
Yeah. I mean, just last night, and we're 71 days into the presidency right now, and I think what's been triggered last night, people really haven't been able to fathom even the medium-term consequences.
Yes.
But we're talking about hyperinflation, we're talking about Japan raising rates, and there's just a lot of implications of what really went down. And there's now counter tariffs that countries are talking about. So
and what I worry about greatly, Gaurav, is that the kind of economic contest that we saw in the 20th century before the Second World War, the outbreak of one of the causes for the outbreak of the Second World War, at least in Asia, was economic. It's a kind of sanctions that the United States had imposed on Imperial Japan.
Yeah.
And they felt that they had no option but to, go hell for leather and kind of, keep the United States out of Asia, capture territories over there. So the Second World War was all about two countries, three, Germany, Japan, and Italy, trying to build their own empires. Yeah. They said they'd been left out of this entire race for empires. They had begun their industrialization, unification, and then later industrialization very late in the 19th century. And then they said, hey, listen, we want our share of empire. And the others said, no, you can't enter this exclusive club. And that's how the fight began in the Second World War.
And of course, Germany had been, beaten down so much after the First World War. And it was the economic strife that actually led to the rise of Nazi Party, anyways.
Absolutely.
And that's how the rapid rise happened. And it's interesting how, again, you've got economies that are now talking about being, insular, closed, protectionism. I mean, these are things that were gone in the time of the free market economy, but doesn't seem like that's the case anymore.
I thought the world was going to be flat forever, Gaurav. It doesn't seem like. I think the world is becoming round again. And you're talking of not globalization, it's localization now.
So true. And I think you touched upon some very important points. And, I'd love to take, some of those points on. So definitely, what's happening with Russia, and we thought we had a deal or at least some semblance of, agreement in one direction. And then, of course, last week we heard that's not happening. I'd love to touch upon, Israel. And unfortunately, the situation in Gaza has got worse again.
Yes.
Syria's become, a can of worms. And I know you have a lot of insights on Syria as well. And would love to know, what really happens in the post-Assad world. Why is, Russia still maintaining a presence in Syria, for example? I thought they would probably, going to also make their way out. But they're defending those areas, a lot. So I'd love to hear about that as well. Of course, a little bit about India and Bangladesh, because we have a new conversation that's trending right now around the chicken's neck.
Yes.
And, how we had Mohammed Yunus who went across to China for God knows what agenda. And, and there's some very heated conversations that have been happening on the internet about how now, we should just, storm in there and capture all of that. But love to have your insights and maybe we'll pick, one at a time. And maybe we can start with the India-Bangladesh, piece.
Yes.
So what really went down? How did Mohammed Yunus get planted there? And, what are the implications now that we have a government in the US which is not supportive of him? So I'd love to have your thoughts on that.
So Gaurav, what happened in Bangladesh was nothing but a regime change operation. We all thought it was this mass uprising of students and, all of that, but it seemed to have been a well thought of, calibrated regime change operation where it's almost like a script that's played out where you have the students taking to the streets in protests and they come over there and then the army is faced with the choice of firing upon its people and says, no, we can't fire on the protesters. Madam, you please leave the country. When Sheikh Hasina leaves, so Sheikh Hasina was someone who led a guided democracy, if you can call it that.
Sure.
She was a bit of an autocrat. She was not a dictator. She was autocratic, but she led Bangladesh through 15 years of peace, progress, and prosperity. The kind of progress that they saw under Sheikh Hasina's rule, stability, peace. She had no contest with India. She wanted to raise the standards of the people of Bangladesh. And she did that to a point when, you had West Pakistan and East Pakistan. East Pakistan was always the basket case. West Pakistan was the shining star.
Right.
And in less than half a century,
completely flipped.
it just flipped. You had Bangladesh that had bigger foreign reserves than Pakistan. Sheikh Hasina did that. She was driven out of the country. And you have this very bizarre chief advisor who takes over, who we think is an interim, arrangement, which his only job is to hold elections.
Correct.
But 7 months down the line, you're looking at a chief advisor who's going around making geopolitical decisions.
Right.
He is aligning Bangladesh. He's taking them right into the China camp. And here is what happened. And this is what I believe happened, is that he was largely seen as a Democrat, a nominee of the Democratic Party in the US,
Correct.
the Obama-Biden administrations. And it was a big shock to him when Trump came to the White House in November.
Right.
And it was an even bigger shock when he saw Prime Minister Modi and President Trump and the great bonhomie that they had in the White House, in the Oval Office.
Right.
And he said, oh my God, now I got to do something spectacular.
Yeah.
So he did this pivot to China, and he goes to Beijing 4 days in 26th of March. And he's offering himself and his country to China. He says, we can be your puppets. We can do what you want.
Right.
India has all these vulnerabilities. We have none of these vulnerabilities. Forgetting that India surrounds this country on three sides.
It does.
Bangladesh is created by India.
Yeah.
We have this romantic notion of the Mukti Bahini that fought for Bangladesh's freedom. Of course they did.
Right.
A lot of my family and friends fought for the liberation of Bangladesh. My co-author was one of that. Were key people who fought for the liberation of Bangladesh. They're all seen as heroes in Bangladesh. What they don't understand is that if the Indian Army, if the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy had not converged in on East Pakistan, you would still have a East Pakistan today. There would have been no Bangladesh in 1971. But that said, what we are asking from our neighbors is a very small modicum of respect, that you don't cross our red lines.
Right.
Which Mohammad Yunus seems to have done by mentioning the chicken's neck and the fact that you have the northeastern states that are landlocked, and therefore Bangladesh is the kind of wedge between the sea and India's landlocked northeast. He's kind of crossed a couple of red lines over there.
Right.
And I think that's not been seen very kindly, but that's the whole game plan there. For Mohammad Yunus to reshape the terrain in Bangladesh, the political terrain. He is doing a terraforming operation where he wants to remove the Awami League as any kind of serious political player. He wants to bring in the BNP. And now the surprising thing is that the BNP is supposed to be seen as the party that's closely aligned to the Jamaat. The Jamaat being the hardline Islamist party of Bangladesh that never wanted independence.
Right.
Independence was always an Awami League project.
Correct.
And the BNP is now worried that, hey, when are we going to see elections? And this is what we have been saying in India, that please hold early elections.
Right.
And Yunus is not in the mood for early elections because he wants to terraform the whole political landscape in Bangladesh before he can call for elections. So he's obviously working with an agenda.
For sure. Yeah.
It's either his agenda, it's the Jamaat agenda, it's the US agenda, or it's possibly a mixture of all of this. But one thing is certain, Gaurav, that he's running out of time. He doesn't have a lot of time.
Agreed. No, I completely agree. I think he's painting himself into a corner, and I'm already seeing, a lot of that prosperity that, Bangladesh garment exporters in particular, have had, and, the orders they were enjoying, a lot of those have already started to slip away from their hands now. And, people aren't sure where this is really headed. So, and I've spent some time in Siliguri and, gone around those areas, and, one really does, of course, see the presence of the, the army, and I think also the Air Force in that area. So where do you see this playing out? I mean, do you think that, India pushed to the corner might just say, okay, enough is enough, and they might actually go and do something?
India is too big to be pushed into any corner, Gaurav. I think we're just going to, ride out the storm. Unuses will come and go, but at the end of the day, it is, we are a geographical reality. We are on three sides of Bangladesh. They have just one other neighbor, Myanmar. They have a small little chicken's neck there with Myanmar, which links them to their entire Chittagong district is linked through that one little chicken's neck across Tripura. So, I mean, there are vulnerabilities that can be played upon. I mean, that's not for me to say or suggest. I mean, whoever is doing it is possibly already working on it. But this is what India wants to do. I mean, the thing is that we are always seen as this big brother in the neighborhood, and Yet, whenever there's a crisis, whether it's a fire, it's a flood, it's famine, it's a natural disaster, it's always Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, and Indian Army that's there on the first responders on the ground, always and every time, irrespective of the ideology of the rulers or the way they respond to us. We are always there. We're always there, ready to help. So the thing is that we are going to grow at more than 6 and 8%. Gaurav. It's up to our neighbors to see if they want to be part of the India growth story, or they can just sit it out and, suffer.
Got that. No, you're totally right. I think even when this earthquake just happened, I think Indian forces were perhaps first responders. I think
in hours, we were there on the ground in hours. Our military aircraft, field hospital set up, the Navy had loaded up ships and they're sending it. So at the end of the day, we want to be good neighbors with all our countries. We don't have any kind of a Monroe doctrine or something. That's a very American thing, right? You don't come to this part of the world. This belongs to us and all that. We have a very benign view of things, especially when it comes to our neighbors. So I think Vasudeva Kutumbakam, a lot of people, we get a lot of flack for that. Oh, you guys are a soft state. And, but that has been the Indian state for eternity. For except a couple of, aberrations, we've always been that way. A benign big power.
And I think it's worked to our favor and benefit. And I think all said and done, when you now travel abroad and you're telling people, you're from India, it's just that the conversations are so different to what they were, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And people like, India, interesting, we want to do work with you. We want to have conversations with you. And that wasn't really the case, earlier.
Yes.
Interestingly, I had someone who just came back from Germany and they were attending a very big fair. And the first question that they were asking, this guy's friend who was walking the fair with him, they said, are you American? Because they're like, if you're American, we don't want to have conversations with you. And I'm like, wow, like Europe speaking like that now. So all of this trade war thing is kind of heating up and is causing a little bit of issues there as well. Let's talk about our other neighbor. And of course, once when we'd spoken earlier, you had been called in to the panel where you were discussing the Baluch train hijacking.
Yes.
Right? Like what really went down there? How does one go ahead and hijack a train? And will we ever get to know what the true picture behind what happened was?
I think we will eventually get to know what happened there, Gaurav. But the fact is that to hijack a train is a very large object, right? It's got 400 passengers. If you're going to hijack a train, it obviously means you have complete control of the surrounding areas and you're able to mobilize people on that number, like hundreds of fighters who are able to converge onto a train and hold it for more than 2 or 3 days.
Right.
And we still don't know what exactly happened. The Pakistan army claims a big victory, but there's a story that we've been told is that a lot of those soldiers were killed. They were all soldiers, mind you, who were traveling back. So the Baluch fighters were very careful in letting go of the women and the children and the civilians, and they held only the soldiers hostage. And the firefight that took place, a lot of soldiers were supposed to have died. But
collateral damage.
Yeah, a lot of and they were prepared to take that collateral damage. For the Pakistan military, it doesn't really matter. For them, civilians, soldiers, it's all firewood for them. So that's why I call Pakistan Firewoodistan. Except the Pakistan military and the generals, everybody is expendable. Yeah, they're just firewood. They just burn up, poof, and they're gone.
I never heard that about Pakistan before. And how's this Baluch thing going to play out? I mean, again, it's really, I think, gone to another level altogether. And very emboldened, of course, with some of the stuff that they've been doing. And how do you see this piece playing out?
The Baluch insurgency is something that it's of a kind of insurgency that I have not seen in the recent past. Given the fact that they're not an Islamist insurgency. They're more tribal. They're more secular in that sense. I have Pakistani friends who, one of them compared them to the LTT. They said, hey, listen, we are fighting the LTT here in Balochistan. And that kind of triggered off, a train of thought where I was thinking about how did the LTT come about? It was all about Tamils versus Sinhalas.
Right.
It was an urban insurgency. It was a rural insurgency. You had some very brilliant fighters who were not fighting for a Hindu cause or a Christian cause. They were fighting for the cause of the Tamils, which is what the Baluch insurgency has become, where you have college lecturers who are now becoming suicide bombers, right? And they're fighting for Balochistan, which they feel has been denied its fair share of their resources. It's an extremely resource-rich province. It's Pakistan's largest province. 2/3 of Pakistan is Balochistan. But yet they're being held hostage by this Punjabi majority of Pakistan. But the worst kept secret in Pakistan is that Pakistan is actually Ranjit Singh's Punjab with nuclear weapons. And they have the northwest frontier province, and they have Sindh, and they have Balochistan, and the Baloch are up in arms. And in the northwest, you have the Pathans, the Pathan tribes who've got their brothers across the Durand line in Afghanistan who are fighting them, which is the Pak Taliban who are aligned with the Afghan Taliban. Yeah. The house is on fire, but the Pakistan military believes that despite all of this, with Balochistan on fire, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa on fire, the Afghan Taliban launching attacks against them, they can still needle India in Kashmir, just enough to keep the pot boiling a little bit.
So true, so true. Yeah, and again, boils down to the economics again, because the Baloch, region has just been so impoverished.
Yes.
But despite having all the resources, and obviously, that's going to lead to...
It's very thinly populated. That's a problem. It's like 2/3 of Pakistan, but it's just less than 15% of Pakistan's population.
Yeah. But I think they've just been set aside for so long now that I think now it's just...
It's a colonization of Balochistan, first by the Pakistanis from Punjab, and now by the Chinese. So it's like a double colonization, and that's what the Baloch resent a lot, and which is why they're fighting for their homeland. This is like the third Baloch struggle, and I think it's one of the deadliest, given the kind of violence that they've been inflicting on the Pakistan military.
Yeah, it's interesting, where you mentioned that Pakistan will still find a way to needle India in some way, and I think you mentioned that in one of your earlier conversations. While India is very strategic with foreign policy, you said Pakistan is very transactional. They'll every time they're finding themselves stuck somewhere, they'll just pull out some asset that the US wants or the Western world needs, and they'll just pass that person on. So
it's a security state. So Pakistan is, I mean, this has been said very often, but it's true that Pakistan is an army with a country. They hold that country ransom. They've got nuclear weapons. They're a nuclear-armed country. And periodically, you will see this, that either it's wanted terrorists who are, pulled out like a rabbit out of a hat, and they give it to the United States, and Trump will say something nice, and the generals feel very, in Rawalpindi. So Rawalpindi is what actually controls Pakistan. It's not Islamabad. It's certainly not Karachi. It's not Quetta. So it is Rawalpindi that takes all the decisions, and it's the Corps commanders. The Corps commanders, but it's actually, it's the same thing. It's the Corps commanders, and who are all, in it for the money. It's a very, very a vicious setup over there, because you have the only army in the world that controls nuclear weapons directly. Everywhere else in the world, all the nuclear armed countries, nuclear weapons are in the custody of the political establishment. India for sure, China as well, even North Korea, they're under the politicians. In Pakistan, the military controls the nuclear weapons, and that is a dangerous situation.
Scary indeed.
And they have somehow in the last 50 years or so, they have begun using the sword of terrorism and the shield of nuclear weapons. So with us, it is the sword and shield kind of thing, where they keep needling us with cross-border terrorism. And when we try and retaliate, they'll put the shield of nuclear weapons. We're going to drop the bomb if you try anything.
And of course, your understanding of the entire situation there is very deep. Your book, on 26/11, spent a lot of time speaking, obviously, of going back where you said the operation, in a way, started all the way back after the 71 war. It played out in 26/11, but it was a very long process, right?
So what happened in 1971 is, this is a paper that I chanced upon when I was working on this book called Operation X, about a covert operation that India did during the 1971 war, one of the largest, during which time they had a alert of a possible attack by the Pakistan Navy. They would launch a mothership from Karachi. That mothership would launch commandos into Mumbai, and those commandos would go and attack naval targets. Now, 26/11 was nothing but that original plan, which we were preparing for and we were anticipating in 71. It was just that plan with LET, executed by this perfect cutout called the LET. And there again, there was a deception plan. The idea was for these bodies to be discovered. 10 of them would die fighting, these 10 terrorists in all of those locations, in the Chabar House and Taj and Oberoi. And we would not know who they were, because that the idea was for them to sink the mothership, which was the Kuber, the trawler. It would be just that rubber boat, and surely nobody could come from Karachi on a rubber boat. The idea was for it to make it look like these were Indians, which is why they had red threads. They had Hindu names. They had ID cards from a college in Hyderabad. They were given aliases, all of them, all 10 terrorists, to make it look like it was Indians attacking Indians. But that, of course, failed spectacularly because Ajmal Kasab was captured alive.
Correct.
He spilled the beans.
Right.
So that's what the Pakistan military has been doing ever since they got nuclear weapons in 1984. Yeah. They went mad after 1984. They said, my God, a whole world opened up, a whole world of possibilities. Because after 1984, they started, needling us in Punjab, nothing happened. Jammu and Kashmir, nothing happened. And they said, let's push the envelope little by little. Right. And they moved the envelope to Mumbai. Yeah. 1993. Yeah. India's liberalization had begun. The engine of that liberalization is Mumbai. So they attack. If you notice, all the attacks are on economic targets. Right. The airport, stock market, 5-star hotel, all of those kind of things. And in the span of 15 years, from 1993 to 2008, you have 3 major attacks, all of them launched by the Pakistan Army's ISI, using cutouts. Dawood Ibrahim in 93, the Indian Mujahideen in 2006, and of course the Lashkar in 2008, all targeting Mumbai. Yeah. So that's the game that the Pakistan military has played.
So true, so true. Yeah, bizarre though. Have your friends in Pakistan ever told you where Dawood is today?
Everyone knows where Dawood is. He's a state guest, Sarkari Mehman, and he lives in that address in Clifton. And he's an asset. Yeah. And he was an asset ever since 1993 when the ISI figured there was a division in the underworld. There was a Hindu-Muslim divide in the underworld, and they took advantage of that. And that famous box of bangles being sent to Dawood Ibrahim when he was in Dubai, from his sisters, that how could you let the community down? Right. The friends of mine who believe that box of bangles was possibly sent by the ISI and not from Mumbai. This is what intelligence agencies do all the time. Yeah. They find that line in Sholay, Sirf loha lohe ko kaatta hai. This is intelligence fieldcraft. This is spycraft. This is what they do all the time. They break the bad guys and they use them against each other. So that's what they did. Yeah. The Pakistanis have done that for the longest time, since 1947.
Got that. And of course, you mentioned the bomb and the entire nuclear project. So obviously, very heavily China, well, not only finance, but also I'm sure that a lot of the intel for making the bomb probably came in from China as well, right?
It's the first and the only example, I believe, in post-1945 where a state has given another state the bomb blueprints, the enriched uranium, the technology to build the bomb, and even tested a bomb for another country. Oh. They did that in 1984. Yeah. A 25 KT weapon was tested. Right. All the blueprints were transferred to the Pakistanis, including the highly enriched uranium. And then they just had to figure out the AQ Khans to, set up the infrastructure to build the bomb. So it's a breakthrough, actually, if you look at it. And then one thinks that this country started off at the same time as we did in 1947. If you look at it, partition and all of that, they could have become anything they wanted. And yet they become this tin pot North Korea on our borders with nuclear weapons. They don't have a middle class. They don't have an aspirational class. They don't have economic liberalization. Yeah. They're just literally living from hand to mouth, from year to year. And periodically you will see this report, Gaurav, I've been seeing it since I was in school, that oil and gas discoveries in Pakistan could make Pakistan the 4th richest.
Was there a gold discovery that happened a few months ago as well?
There's gold, there's uranium, there's oil and gas. And if you collate all of these discoveries over the last 50 years, Pakistan would possibly have more natural resources than probably even the Russian Federation. It's always timed around the time when they need an IMF handout.
Bailout,
yeah. So that's what they've been doing from, hand to bailout.
It's interesting. And I was in New York a couple of months ago, and and I normally do end up, speaking a lot to the Uber drivers. And, this guy turned out to be from Karachi. Right. We were just chatting, and, and of course, he mentioned a lot of things that he said there was a water crisis in the past. Yes. And he said that water crisis, even the tankers and the supply of water was controlled by the general and his immediate family.
Yes.
And there was money that was being paid directly there. And I was just saying, I said, I've of course never been to Pakistan, but I said my understanding was Karachi was like Bombay and Rawalpindi is like Delhi. He's like, sir, kyun mazak kar rahe ho?
But the Pakistan army is not like the Indian army.
And he says, if you had said this statement 25 years ago, I would have said, okay, Karachi is beautiful and it's maybe like a Bombay. He says, today, boss, it's a joke. He says, kuch bhi nahi hai hamare paas.
Today it's really sad because, here is a country with a lot of potential. They could have made a different, existence for themselves, but they just chose the wrong path thanks to the kind of rulers that they have. And, I've been to Pakistan, Gaurav, several years back, and this was about 15 years ago, and I met this food minister, Chaudhary Saab. He was in Shahbaz Sharif's government. Okay. He hosted us for breakfast once. Oh, wow. And how the Pakistanis, they just lay out, Mehman Nawazi is really big for them. And he was talking about, the different paths that we've taken. And this was the year that India had got the rupee symbol for its currency. And so they said, that's a problem there. The Indian economy seems to be, on track. And he said, the problem with us is that our father died shortly after independence. We didn't have anyone to guide us. But you had a very intelligent set of leaders who took you down the right path. And then I realized, my God, he's so right. And sometimes you have to go across the border to get a different view of your country. Yeah. Where we criticize ourselves, we are the most self-critical people on earth, I feel at times, Gaurav. But I said, look, our leadership has taken all the right decisions. What are the decisions that they've taken? Yeah. The first big decision, I think this is the most important decision that any political class has taken post-47, is food security. Okay. Where Lal Bahadur Shastri and later Mrs. Gandhi decide that we have to grow our own food to feed our people. The Green Revolution happens. And then you have China testing nuclear weapons in 1964. And we realize we're vulnerable. 1962, we've been invaded. We need to look after our own security. What do? We need our own nuclear weapons because no one's going to come to our assistance. Our existence as a nation is threatened. So we started the nuclear weapons program. 64. Post 64, of course. 74, you tested. 98, you weaponized, tested and then weaponized. And today you're a nuclear weapons state. At a time when you said you didn't think that there would be a time when Europe would be at daggers drawn with the United States, which was meant to be their security umbrella and all of that, you realize what a big decision our founding fathers took, which is to make us self-sufficient in food, feed 1.4 billion people. That's a lot of people to feed. And get nuclear weapons to ensure your security, survival, because you're not a treaty ally. No one's going to come to your rescue. You have to fight your own battles. So, these are all those decisions that we've taken. And it's all, at the end of the day, that's our biggest resource that we have. It's the human resource.
So true. So true. Interesting that you also mentioned, treaty alliances. In the world that we're now heading into, do you actually see a world without NATO or a watered down NATO in the future?
We are not in the future. We are already seeing a watered down NATO. NATO has already been watered down. Trump has said, what is this NATO bunch of freeloaders? They're not paying for their security. They better start paying up. And NATO then realizes, oh my God, which among us has nuclear weapons? Anyone in the room? Says, none of us has developed it. We all thought the Americans are going to come and swing into our rescue and all that. So now you have the unprecedented situation of France, which is possibly the smartest nation in Europe, which developed its own nuclear weapons and it looked after its own energy security, which is now saying that, look, French nuclear weapons will slowly be used to protect all of Europe. And what is happening is there's a joke that I use to illustrate the geopolitics that we are in, which is the rearming of Europe, which is Germany weaponizing, going after, turning car factories into tank factories and all of that. Right. This is the kind of rearmament that we saw pre the Second World War. Right. That's where we're headed to. So I talk of this, it's an old joke, repurposed. There's a Russian bear that breaks out of the forest and it's heading towards two people. It's two Europeans. One's a German and the other's Ukrainian. Okay. The German sits down and starts putting on his shoes. And the Ukrainian says, you idiot, you think you can outrun the bear by, so the German says, I don't have to outrun the bear, I have to outrun you. Yeah. So that's what's happening now. They've seen Ukraine falling. And now they're all trying to protect themselves, build up their military infrastructure because the Americans are not there. The Americans want us to pay. Yeah. And now they have to build their own tanks, their own fighter aircraft, and get people. And that, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge for Europe. Where are they going to find the soldiers to fight in their militaries?
North Korea.
North Korea. Even the Russian Federation had to get North Korean soldiers. So there's an acute shortage of people. This was not the situation 80 years ago or 90 years ago when they fought the Second World War. They had enormous human resources.
Because the colonies would have sent a lot of
And
people
of course, Great Britain had India that sent 2 million fighting soldiers, which fought on every single theater of the world. So the Brits could claim that they had won the war on the side of the United States and the Soviet Union.
Right. Oh, yeah. I think the contribution of the colonies, I mean, all of them, Australia, India, I'm sure even the Caribbean, had a sizable contribution towards the war.
And yet you don't find a single Indian or a Caribbean or any of these nationalities in any of those wonderful war films that we've all grown up seeing over the last 50 years or so.
Very true. Very true. Interesting. Let's do a bit of a rapid fire. Okay. And this would be slightly, maybe even, jumping into your mind as, you as a person. And so 15, 20 rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Just feel free to answer them in a few words or a sentence or two, whatever comes to your mind. Right. So first thing you do after filing a big story.
First thing I do after filing a big story. Well, I haven't filed a big story in a while. That was the magazine that I did. Right. But if I would write a column, if I wrote a big column on something really important, I'd just go back to reading again. Then I realized that I know so little and I need to, recharge my batteries. Pick up. Yeah.
Right. Beverage of choice while writing, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay. One book that every Indian must read.
One book that every Indian must read is the Indian Constitution.
Yeah. Oh, like that. Of course, defense being your thing. Your favorite war movie?
My favorite war movie, Indian or Western?
Let's do both. One of each.
My favorite Western war movie would be The Thin Red Line. And that Terrence Malick's movie, which talks about the futility of war. Yeah. It's actually an anti-war movie.
Right.
That would be my favorite Western war movie.
Interesting choice.
My favorite Indian war movie, Vijeta, 1983, made by Shashi Kapoor. Govind Nilani, Shashi Kapoor produced it. Govind Nilani directed it. It's on the Indian Air Force, and it has Kunal Kapoor coming of age.
Definitely one of the classics. Yeah.
It is one of the best war movies.
Yeah. Nice. A historical figure. Being a student of history, a historical figure that you'd love to interview.
Present or in the past?
Okay, let's take past.
Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Is there any other?
So true. What's one of the biggest myths about journalists and journalism?
One of the biggest myths about journalists and journalism. We know a lot more than everyone else.
I would agree. Yeah. Print or digital, your preferred format?
Right. It's like asking a parent which one is your favorite child. But I'd say print.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An Indian city that you never get bored of?
Mumbai.
Yeah. Okay. Pen, paper or laptop, your preferred choice of putting your thoughts down?
Pen and paper, any day.
Okay. If you weren't a journalist, what would you be?
If I wasn't a journalist, I'd be an archaeologist.
Yeah.
Be digging up the past.
Of course. Yeah, that sounds very plausible. What's harder for you, asking questions or answering questions?
Answering questions.
You're doing great today. And you're on the other side of the table today. A story that you wish you had more time to cover?
Literally every story that I've written. And, when I finish writing a story or, putting it together for the digital medium that I work with, I wish I had more time. But it would have to be my second book, Operation X, which I wrote with Captain M.N.R. Samant.
Right.
I wrote it, I was racing against time because my co-author was 88 years old and he was rushing me through it. And he says, look, you got to finish it quickly. So that's why, and I really wish I had a little more time to write that book. We did it in less than 2 years. Ideally, I'd have wanted maybe 6 months more. Possibly I can do that with the second edition.
Love that. Your writing environment, silence or some kind of music in the background?
Oh, complete silence, pin drop silence. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I hear a lot of people. They're like, even our common friend Advaita, she's like, I need some music and I need the environment and all of that. So, yeah, I find a lot of writers today they would need some kind of music. But interesting. Favorite time of the day to write?
Oh, in the morning. Yeah, crack of dawn.
If you could embed yourself with a military unit for a week, where would it be?
Marine Commandos.
Yeah. Awesome.
Indian Naval Marine Commandos.
Right. Okay. Last couple of ones. If there was a journalist from history that you would have loved to shadow for a day, who would that journalist be?
That journalist would have to be Richard Sorge. He was a correspondent for a German publication in Tokyo during the war. And it turns out that he wasn't a journalist. He was an NKVD agent. Wow. And I think he had a day job as a journalist, but he had a night job as an NKVD thing. And he altered the course of history in a number of ways. So that's a fascinating journalist. And it's a kind of a reflection of the kind of life that journalists also lead, that very... especially in these kind of countries, we operate where many other people can't go.
So true.
So that was Richard Sorge for you. Yeah.
Awesome. And hence my last question to you would be, what's the biggest risk that you've taken in your career?
The biggest risk I've taken in my career was to go into an abandoned terrorist training camp in Afghanistan in 2001 after the Taliban had fled. And that camp hadn't been sanitized. There were landmines around. And I got to know of that after I came back. And my Afghan hosts were delirious with laughter. They said, that place is crawling with unexploded ammunition and mines. And why the hell did you go there?
Wow.
And that's when I said that, these are things that you reflect. And I would never do that again. Not for $1 million. I would never go back there. But it was that adrenaline rush. Oh, you've come here. You got to see how these people lived, what they trained. And, I was going and picking up notebooks and, little pieces of uniforms, trying to reconstruct the kind of life that these students led. And coincidentally, when those letters that I picked up, they were all written in Urdu. It turned out that they were all Pakistani, terrorists who were training there in an Afghan Taliban camp. This was 2001. December 2001.
The dynamics were also very different.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And how long did you spend at that camp?
I was there for a day, an entire day. I'd gone there in the morning, came back there in the evening. Gone there with some of these Northern Alliance soldiers, and they were showing us around. This was just a few days after the Taliban had fled. Yeah. And now the Taliban are back. The wheels full circle.
Right. Yeah, truly. I mean, I think there's just so much that's, just coming back to the way it was, and it's bizarre, and so many Frankensteins, that are just coming out of the closets and I think biting people on the backside, right? And that's happening in so many places now.
It is, and Pakistan's the place where it's happening the most, because what Hillary Clinton said a couple of years back, it's not like you can have snakes in your backyard and hope that they only bite their neighbors. Sooner or later, the snakes will come and bite you. That's 100%. What's going on there.
100%. So let's come into now, let's say the Middle East, because that's again, on the boil. The US has had a really big bombing offensive against the Houthis, and then now you have Iran saying that we have 1,000 missiles which are locked and loaded, ready to fly. Right. I believe the B-52s are now in Diego Garcia and other places ready to attack as well. What's happening in Iran, and how are you seeing this piece playing out? Well,
Trump wants a deal out of Iran. He wants, and he's been pretty amenable to them. If you see his pre-election, you see his pre-swearing-in speeches and statements.
Right.
He wants a deal with the Iranians. He wants them to give him an undertaking that they will not develop nuclear weapons. And then he wants the Iranians to open up their economy to the United States.
Okay.
To buy a lot of stuff, to buy Boeing, to buy Lockheed Martin, to buy all of that thing, right?
Yeah.
And he wants Iranian oil, gas, natural resources, all of that. And most importantly, he wants to break Iran away from China. The whole game is about isolating China. He wants to get Russia away from the Chinese embrace. He wants to get Iran away from the Chinese embrace. And given a chance, even North Korea. He wants to isolate China because the American state, and this is across parties, the Democrats, the Republicans, they all see China and they see in China a peer competitor of the kind that they've never faced ever in their past. Not since the early 20th century when the United States became the preeminent global superpower, and this is a position it's held for a century. They now seem to think that that time is coming to an end. 100 years have passed. The Chinese are gaining. It's only a matter of time, a decade or two before China becomes the world's number one economy. It's not going to be just the number one economy. It'll be the number one manufacturing powerhouse as well. It's in alliance with the number one resource superpower, which is the Russian Federation.
Correct.
It's a challenge that the United States has never faced. They've had, well, to an extent, the Imperial Japan and Germany and Great Britain. They sorted them all out. And the USSR was not an economic threat. It was an ideological threat to the United States, but never an economic power. But China represents all of these. And therefore, the United States wants to tackle China head on. And that's what Trump's game is. He wants to wean the Russians away, possibly get the North Koreans and the Iranians away, do a deal with all of them, and then tackle China head on. He wants, finally, that big deal. He wants a deal with Xi Jinping.
Wow. Yeah. And I think which is why you've seen such a change in the posturing even over Ukraine, where, it's just like, get Putin onto my side, irrespective of whatever, that means with, erstwhile European alliances, I think.
So he's just thrown Ukraine under the bus because he realizes the bigger issue they have is that they cannot have a no-limits partnership between China and the Russian Federation. So what he's trying to do with Putin is to do a reverse Nixon. If you remember in 1972, where Nixon went to Mao and he got him out of Mao was already out of the USSR, the alliance with the USSR, but he got them onto the American side. And this guy, Trump, wants to do the same with Putin. And that's what this whole thing is. And he's been hinting at all of this. Now, the thing is that Putin believes he's on a winning wicket in Ukraine. His forces are, literally demolishing the Ukrainian army, and he's grabbing territory. He's already got 20% of Ukraine. He wants to ensure that they don't have to do that again, ever. They've already lost a lot of soldiers, more than 100,000 soldiers. That's a lot of soldiers to lose. And he wants some kind of a permanent guarantee from the West over Ukraine that it never becomes a NATO partner country. There is never going to be Western military's position there. In short, Ukraine never becomes what Pakistan is to India. They do not want a strong Ukraine on their doorstep. And that's the reason. That's why he's playing hardball.
What do you think it's going to take to get Putin to, finally sign a peace deal? It'll be a couple of these points.
He needs ironclad guarantees on all of this.
And he's not giving back any land.
It doesn't look like he's going to part with all of that territory that he's already captured, which is all Russian-speaking territories. And they say that, look, these are all Russian-speaking people. They're being oppressed by the Ukrainians. The Ukraine can keep whatever territory they want, but across the Dnieper, we are going to keep the Russian-speaking lands. And Crimea is, of course, ours. We grabbed it in 2014. And we're going to keep all that we captured.
Yeah, and I think in the end, it'll again just boil down to the economics of the situation. If Ukraine just can't keep it going anymore, and they don't have armament and weapons from the US and other intel and support, I guess they'd probably have to fold at some point.
And for Ukraine, I think it's a very grim assessment because it's all about national survival for them. That they're left with very little cards, and you had none other than the president of the United States telling Zelensky, "Look, you have no cards. You better play the way I want you to." So that's what it was. It's very sad, but that's the way geopolitics is. It's not geopolitics actually. It's realpolitik. It's the way of nature. Might is right, and that's what we are seeing in this 2025.
Yeah, loving this conversation, and it's been amazing to pick your brains on all of these insights. I'm going to take two more areas. One of them obviously being Syria, right, and what's going down there. and the second being Israel and Gaza, and again the renewed fighting that's kind of happened there. So let's take Syria first. So late November, Assad gets flown out.
Yes.
Syria falls, but Russia is still maintaining bases there, right? Israel has kind of further maybe moved ahead of the Golan into taken certain other areas.
Yes.
What's really going down to the country? I mean, and again, being a student of history, we talk about the splitting of the Chinese melon. It seems like there's a splitting of the Syrian melon right now. What's happening?
It's you're basically reversing what the Sykes-Picot's line did after the First World War, where they just carved up the Ottoman Empire and they built all these, they just drew lines on sand. Right. And they said, this is Jordan, this is Syria, this is Iraq, and this is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They did all of that. And today you're seeing a lot of those lines being blurred by force of arms. Yeah. You have an Ottoman Empire which believes that we don't respect the border. I mean, they're not in the P5, but they're certainly behaving like one of the P5 countries which don't recognize the sovereignty and territorial integrity of neighbors. And Turkey is behind this latest thing. What you just mentioned in Syria is that they have propped up this new government that is there, this very dubious jihadi government that has taken over. And they are ruling only very small parts of Syria. And the tragedy of the Syrian Arab Republic is that it doesn't exist in the shape and form that we knew it about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. It has just been torn apart, literally, and it's just zones of influence. That you have a Kurdish Syria, you have an HTS Syria, you have an Alawite Syria, whatever pockets of it are there. You have parts of it which Israel has gone and captured. I mean, it's created a buffer zone. And all of this happened, when you had that so-called Arab Spring, correct, which just turned into this Islamist nightmare across the Middle East. It's just destroyed countries.
Gaddafi was one of the first.
So it is, I think, I'm not sure if it is, not knowing the realities of these countries like Iraq, Syria, and Libya. These are very fragile countries that are held together by dictators. You see the dictator, and you say, there is that evil dictator, I'm going to knock him off. And you knock him off, and you realize that dictator was actually the stopper in a bottle, and there's a genie inside the bottle. And that genie comes out and devours that country. And that's what's happened in Libya. It's what's happened in Iraq. Iraq is now stable. It's what's happened in Syria. These countries have been just devoured by this, these Islamist forces. You have neighbors, aggressive neighbors who are, who believe they're, descendants of the Ottoman Empire and this empire and that empire and all. They have kind of, unleashed all their forces. And this entire fragile Middle East has been torn apart ever since that very infamous Arab Spring moment. Some countries have regained their balance, like Egypt, for instance, when they made the cardinal sin of getting the Islamic Brotherhood. Yeah. And that's when someone realized that, hey, Morsi is actually Islamic Brotherhood. Maybe we need to get our evil, hated military dictator back. And so they just repackaged Hosni Mubarak and they brought him back as El-Sisi. And that's what the realization is across the Middle East, that all of these countries are held together by strongmen. Yeah. These are not countries that you can plant American or Western style democracy and Westminster democracies and, hope for it to that tree to, flourish overnight. Right. For these countries to have Westminster style democracies, they must have Westminster style societies, which they don't. They are deeply tribal, divided societies. Right. They don't have the kind of societies that you possibly have maybe in India or maybe in the West. Yeah. It's horses for courses. You cannot force your model of governance onto those countries. Yeah. That this is what works over there. This has always worked over there and possibly will in the near future as well. So what you're seeing in Syria is a very tragic consequence of those miscalculations, and that country ceases to exist. It was such a rich, prosperous, standard bearer of modern values there in the Middle East. It was a beacon of hope for a lot of minorities, especially. Correct. Because they were ruled by a minority Alawite Shia sect. Mm-hmm. They allowed all the other minorities to flourish.
Correct.
especially Christians and all that. And
Correct.
today you have open season on the minorities there in Syria. And it's going to turn into some kind of an Islamist country as well. And of course, the trigger, and this is what I call the Gavril Princip moment of the Middle East, West Asia as we call it, is Yahya Sinwar. He was the Gavril Princip. He fired that one shot that changed the world in 1914 and that changed the world in 2023, 7th of October. There was no need for Sinwar to do what he did on the 7th of October. Yeah. And he's just unleashed a chain of events, and West Asia is not going to be the West Asia that we knew once was.
And again, just so much of, as you mentioned, Age of Empires, the history repeating itself. And it truly, so much of this is definitely coming full circle again. Israel and Gaza, and of course, it's unfortunate, what's happened again. And we thought we had peace. There was a ceasefire of sorts, the Palestinians had started to move back up north again, and now again things have fallen apart. What's really gone down there, and how does one work on fixing this?
What's gone down there, Gaurav, is the fact that Israel sees a very pro-Israel administration in Washington, possibly the most pro-Israel administration of all time. Right. And they see this as a chance to finish off Hamas. Because what happened on the 7th of October, I was sitting there sipping my morning coffee and looking at my social media, and I saw my Twitter feed. And when I saw my Twitter feed, I saw the images coming out of there. My heart sank, and I actually sat, we had a live television thing immediately, and I made a couple of predictions, 10 predictions, and nearly all of them have proved to be correct, almost 2 years later, where I said that the Israeli response to this is going to be a ground assault of the kind that we have never seen in the past. Because you've killed the maximum number of Israeli civilians post the Second World War. Yeah. More than 1,400 Jewish civilians were killed over there. And in the most brutal and in the most unimaginably brutal manner. I was there a few months after. I have seen some of these brutalities, and it is so graphic. It is meant to elicit a response. Sinwar knew that the Palestinian cause was dying. It was on the back burner in a lot of countries, especially in West Asia. He saw the Abraham Accords realigning West Asia, and possibility of permanent peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. He could not allow that to happen, which is why he did this suicidal charge. And the responses of Israel have been very brutal, but calibrated. They want their hostages back. This is a hostage situation of a kind that we've not seen in the past. They've captured, in fact, the whole of the Gaza Strip has become like a hostage thing where they barricaded themselves with these hostages amidst civilians that, do your worst. And which is what the Israelis have done. For Israel, their civilians matter. We can't understand that in India. We are a very large country. We have 1.4 billion people. But for the Israelis, every civilian matters. Every soldier matters. They are willing to trade 1,000 terrorists for one Israeli soldier. That's the kind of choices that they've made in the past. And for you to imagine that you could do this and not expect retaliation, that's what's playing out in Gaza. It's terrible, the loss of civilian lives. Hamas could have avoided all of this by not doing any of this. I think they war gamed on the fact that the Israelis would stop after a certain point and there would be global pressure and all of that. But it's been it's almost 2 years now and they're still at it. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu has set himself the target of wiping out Hamas in any form whatsoever.
Yeah, I've seen some of those statements and
it's very hardline. It's very hardline, and this is the beast that Hamas has unleashed upon themselves. And West Asia's possibly it's going to come back to normalcy at some point. The Abraham Accords are going to eventually fructify. Saudi Arabia will eventually shake hands with Israel, but at such a terrible human cost.
So true. Yeah, truly interesting, times, and I think never have been, more tumultuous in, what we're seeing in
decades,
in these months.
Decades and weeks.
Right, like you mentioned. What are your predictions for, and we're going to end this, with that as well. What are some of your predictions that you have for 25-26?
2025, 26, if you'd asked me about 5 years back, I could make some safe assumptions and predictions. But the kind of times that we're living in, it's almost difficult to make any kind of prediction which could not be overturned a week from now. I mean, things are moving so quickly. But having said that, I'd like to stick my neck out and make a few predictions. I mean, of course, India will continue growing the way we are. There's not going to be any major war because our focus right now is on the economy. 100%. Right? We have to keep growing for the next 20 years.
Right.
We have to try and achieve double-digit growth.
Right.
That is the clear focus of the entire Indian political establishment, as it ought to be. Economic growth, the betterment of our people, uplifting people out of poverty, Viksit Bharat, becoming a developed nation. Right. All of those goals are going to happen, and India is going to continue down this path. What we will see in the environment around us is some big geopolitical shocks. I think China is going to make a play for Taiwan. Mm-hmm. You're already seeing a lot of that playing out in
live ammo exercises have been happening.
So these live exercises are part of a very deliberate military strategy, that you keep the tempo of military exercises up and you keep doing it so frequently that the people who are watching them get lulled into complacency and they believe that, oh, this is just another exercise. And before you know it, they go and pull the trigger, and grab Taiwan. Because for Xi Jinping, he wants Taiwan. That's going to be his legacy. And I think he needs it more than any other thing of, making China great again. He wants to make Taiwan China again. That's what he wants. And I have a feeling that all of this is working towards a plan, that they would not do so many military exercises around Taiwan unless it is for an objective, unless it is to convince Trump that the only deal that is possible is for us to keep Taiwan, and we'll talk about it after that. After we keep Taiwan, we'll talk of a China-US trade deal. So those are the kind of waters that we are headed towards. Very dark, uncharted waters. And actually, if you look at it from the 21st century perspective, it might look uncharted, but we are entering the kind of waters that we did a long time ago. There's probably 2 generations that have not seen this kind of geopolitical uncertainty.
For sure.
Possibly not since the Cold War ended, because now you're seeing countries, you're not seeing little terrorist groups running around, you're seeing entire countries and nation states and all that fighting wars. So you're going to see a lot more geopolitical instability, and that would be the big, the black swan event that could actually completely change the dynamics. So who knows how the US would react to that. Trump could be goaded into a military response. That, if Taiwan falls, then everything else falls, right? Russia might be emboldened to go into Europe as well, all of those things. So then the warmongers will take over.
Correct.
So we are heading towards a very dangerous place. India, I don't see ourselves being, because of the kind of path that we have set ourselves out to, we don't want to be part of any global military alliance and all that. We're going to sit this one out. We're going to see what's going to play out, and we will urge everyone to, tread the path of peace. Now is not the time for war. That's a great line that came out from the Prime Minister. That's what we're going to keep urging, and we can only hope that better sense prevails, and they're going to sit around a table and talk it rather than, jaw, rather than war.
So true. No, I completely agree, and echo those thoughts as well. And I think India's on a great path, but it would definitely help if a little bit of sanity returned to the world stage as well, and things could kind of get back to what the normal used to be rather than what it is today. Once again, Sandeep, thank you so very much for being on Let's Chat with GB, and it was an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure all viewers and listeners would agree that this was one action-packed conversation, short in one take. He didn't even drink a sip of water. So it just shows, the intensity and the passion with which, you bring to the conversations, and at least this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. Pleasure having you.
A few gifts for you, as I also do run a gifting company.
Right.
So this is just something for you. I'm sure every journalist likes a nice pen.
Oh,
so that's
right.
From the Shantanu Nikhil collection.
Thank you.
So we have that. And I do have one of my journals, which I want to give you as well. So that's
yes, of course.
Scaling with GB, gold planner.
Right.
And for all your travels around the world, also a passport holder that's been designed by Shantanu Nikhil as well.
Thank you.
Just a little something.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you for making the time. And,
thank you for having me.
We will put in your handles and where people can reach out to you and stay connected to you, because I'm sure the insights you're putting out on Twitter and X and a lot of the other places, would really be insightful for many. So thank you so very much.
Thanks, Gaurav.
Awesome. We have a very large viewership, but in conjunction to that viewership, the subscription on the podcast, well, there's some work to be done as well. In fact, 98% of our viewers are not subscribers to our channel. So if I can make a request to each and every one of you, if you find value in what we deliver, if you like the content that we bring on the podcast on Let's Chat with GB, just go ahead and hit the subscribe button and do share ahead as well. It will go a very, very long way in bringing a lot more guests, a lot more value content, and a lot more value to each and every one of you. Looking forward to having you as our subscribers. Thank you.